Let's start at the beginning. When you're talking about research with infants and language perception, what's the goal? Is the goal just to learn how we developed our language and to understand it better? Is the goal to learn how to communicate better? What's kind of like the underlying theme there?
So the goal of our research is to understand how environmental conditions affect infants' ability to learn and develop their language abilities. So, for example, a lot of our early language research was done in a lab in really pristine settings, but we know that people grow up in lots of different conditions. There are, for example, full neighborhoods that are next to the railroad tracks or near an airport. And that kind of persistent background noise has an effect on the way that we're able to learn and understand speech. So our research is contributing to our understanding of what happens when we have these persistent distractors in our environment. What happens if we leave the television on all day when we're trying to talk to our kids and talk to our infants? Does that have an effect on the way that they learn language?
So there's potentially really broad implications for, learning what kind of distractions take away from their ability to perceive language and communication, and catering an environment to, be conducive to that, or recognizing the environments that aren't conducive to learning.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. For example, one of the more recent findings that we've had, there are these chairs for infants that kind of play music. They're like these little bouncy chairs that you can put kids in, and they play all sorts of really loud music. So we took the music from those bouncy chairs, we put it in the background, and then we had infants listen when we called their name or another infant's name. And we find that even when the bouncy chair is really, really quiet in the background, 15 decibels quieter than we're calling their name, they still don't show a preference for their name over another infant's name. That bouncy chair music is just so distracting. So it kind of tells us, these bouncy chairs are okay. They're plenty, they're entertaining for the kids. But if you want to say things to them that they understand, you might want to turn the bouncy chair off.
Is that a symptom of adults building something for kids that they think kids will like? Because we get to a point where we can tune out the noise, but infants can't yet. So we're like, here, baby, sit in this loud music chair. And we think, okay, kind of like what we do with dogs, where we're like, okay, we see our interactions with dogs through the scope of how we think and how we feel and everything, but we are not dogs and we are not babies. Is that what's going on there?
Yes, I'm almost certain that's what's going on. We're creating something where we can perceive speech when it's being spoken, when this bouncy chair is happening. So we assume that it'll be fine for babies to be in the presence of that kind of noise as well. And the kinds of questions, or the way that we tie this into our dog research, when we were thinking about infants' difficulties perceiving speech with these different kinds of background noise, we were trying to figure out why it was that they had difficulty perceiving speech. So we were thinking about all these underlying systems that are contributing to their speech perception. So is it that they're actually having trouble paying attention because the background noise is more distracting for them than it would be for an adult human, for example? And because infants kind of aren't great at any of these systems, it's really hard to design an experiment just with infants to determine which of these systems is really contributing to their difficulty. Mm-hmm. And this is where we realized dogs would be a great model, because their auditory cortex is fully developed. So we can sort of rule that out for the dogs if that can't possibly be a contributing issue for dogs' perception. But dogs' attention for human speech is sort of comparable to that of young children. They're quite interested, but they're not going to pay attention for a long period of time. And while their linguistic input probably isn't at the same level as that of infants, they're living in our house, they're listening to us talk all the time, and we certainly say their name quite a lot. So we could at least be assured that dogs know what their own name is.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of with the infants, it sounds like you have hardware issues with their ears. You don't know if the auditory system is developed enough. Then you have software issues where it's like, okay, is their brain capable of this? And dogs, at least, you could go, the hardware's in place. We know that. So it sort of just takes that level out and you go, okay, what's the software doing and what can we learn about that?
Yes, that's an excellent analogy. That's essentially exactly what we're looking at.
You're using, when you're doing your research, you're using dogs that we're not talking puppies here. You're talking dogs that are 4 or 5 years old that they know their name, they know some commands and stuff, right?
Yes, they are all dogs that are owned by people in the DC metro area, and they are approximately 4 years old on average. We do have a separate study for puppies just to kind of see what puppies are able to do, but these particular studies with speech perception are generally done with adult dogs. And we make sure that they've also had their name long enough that they know what it is.
Mm-hmm. Is the puppy thing just so you guys have an excuse to play with puppies? It's okay.
Maybe it's possible.
So
it's also, to be honest, so that we bring them in when they're puppies, and then when they're older, we can just contact them and say, "Hey, you want to come back for another study?"
Mm-hmm.
So.
is that I mean, I was joking there, but when you say that, is there like a vetting process going on there a little bit where you're going, man, if these people bring in the puppies, we get to look at the puppies, we get to look at the owners and go, this is probably the kind of dog and owner that we would want to come back at 4 years old because, you know, the dog is going to get worked with, taken care of, that kind of stuff, or is that just not true?
So we try to design our studies so that any dog could participate. In fact, we find that really highly trained dogs like service dogs or veteran search and rescue dogs tend to have difficulty in our studies because they are boring. They are fundamentally designed so that the dog is supposed to sit there and just look at some sources of audio, and it happens for 7 straight minutes. And it's we usually find that pet dogs do very well with that, but that as they get more and more and more training, they get bored because it's quite boring.
Interesting. Is there a reason for the approximate 4-year age for those dogs? Is there some maturity thing going on there? Why that threshold?
So we our requirements are that the dog has had their name for at least 10 months and that they're at least a year old, just so that we can have a certain level of maturation of all of their systems. And from there, we just say that the dog just needs to be above that threshold, but we don't want them to be so old that they have hearing loss. And we've occasionally encountered an owner and a dog where the owner doesn't realize that their dog has hearing loss until they come into our study. And the dog doesn't react to any of our stimuli or any of the sounds. And they say, "Oh, I thought my dog was just stubborn or was just not paying attention to me." I was like, "No, your dog can't hear." So, so that's rough. I think it's relieving for the owners to know that their dog is not just purposefully ignoring them. But that does occasionally happen. So usually 4 is kind of just an average of the ages of dogs adult dogs in general in our area that people were bringing in, although we've certainly had some older dogs and some slightly younger dogs between 1 and 4.
Well, it makes sense that you would want to just take dogs from the general pet ownership population and not dogs that were especially bred and especially trained for certain tasks. And so that makes sense. The dog that can't hear, that's an interesting one because we hear, especially talking to trainers a lot, they'll get a puppy in for, 3 months to work it for obedience or something. And every once in a while, they'll talk about one that's just insanely stubborn. And I wonder now, we assume, all puppies are born and they can hear really well and dogs have amazing hearing and amazing noses, but it's just like us. It's just not true. Exactly.
It's hard to notice. I mean, Trevor Noah told a story on The Daily Show about his dog growing up where they really just thought his dog Toofy was really stupid because she didn't react to anything. And then the vet eventually said, like, "How did you take care of this deaf dog?"
Mm-hmm.
And they just never realized and thought their dog was kind of dumb.
That's horrible.
Yeah. So it's there's a sort of basic owner test that you can do. And this is kind of just a basic thing that even we do with babies sometimes. You just sort of snap or clap behind the dog's head and see if they turn.
Mm-hmm.
Not a foolproof test, but if your dog is really very, very deaf, they likely won't respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
So we sometimes, while we don't actually do an auditory any auditory test on the dog when they come in, we do that basic test and we ask the owner about their perception of the dog's hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So we try and make sure that the dog can hear as one of the qualifications for our test. But we do have these anecdotes.
That's a good idea. Let's talk about the cocktail party situation that you guys have going on. I saw a bunch of articles. I read your papers, and you ran some research on figuring out what level of distraction dogs will pay attention around and that kind of stuff. Can you get into that a little bit?
Sure. So my advisor's early work was all about the cocktail party effect in infants. And the cocktail party effect is basically if you're at a crowded party or you're in a coffee shop and you're trying to talk to someone who is across from you, you need to be able to pay attention to the person who's across from you and tune out all the information around you. And that ability to sort of focus on this one auditory stream while ignoring everything around you is one example of the cocktail party effect. So with infants and with dogs, we use the same testing mechanism, which is really great for us because then we can make direct comparisons between the infants and the dogs. So what we do is we bring the dogs into our little testing booth. And in the testing booth, they hear some different auditory streams. And we play them 4 different types. The first one is their own name. So we'll get the dog's name ahead of time. So do you have a dog?
I do have a dog, yes.
What's your dog's name?
Luna.
Luna. I'll use her name in the examples. So if Luna was coming in, we would have asked you beforehand what her name is and what other nicknames you use for her and the most common name that she hears. And if her most common name is Luna, then we'll record that sort of in a happy, friendly, like I'm calling her to me voice. Mm-hmm. So it'll be 22 seconds worth of Luna, Luna, Luna. And that is one of the streams she'll hear. She'll then hear a stream of another dog's name said with the same intonation. So if she heard, Luna as her own name, she might hear Roscoe as another dog, and it'll be in the same intonation pattern. Roscoe, Roscoe, Roscoe. Then she'll hear her name and that other dog's name embedded in this 9-talker babble, which is meant to simulate this sort of party or coffee shop effect of sort of talking to someone and having this in the background. And we did that at 3 different levels. So we tested 3 different groups of dogs on these 3 levels. The first one is where the dog's name is louder than the background noise. The second one is where the dog's name is at an equivalent intensity level to the background noise. And the third is where the dog's name was quieter than the background noise. And different dogs heard each one of these conditions. So we brought Luna in. She'll listen to these 4 conditions: her name, the other dog's name, her name in the 9-talker background noise, and the other dog's name in the 9-talker background noise at her assigned level. And she'll hear these 4 different trial types 4 times, and that'll take about 7 to 10 minutes. And you as the owner would be sitting in the booth with her, watching her listen to these different trial types. So as she's sitting there, we're going to draw her attention to one side of the booth. So a light will be flashing on one side of the booth. We'll wait until she turns and looks. And then as soon as she looks, she'll start hearing that fun audio, Luna or Roscoe or whichever trial is about to happen. And as long as she keeps looking, she'll keep getting more sound. So we're sort of teaching her that if she wants to hear more of it, she's got to keep looking at the wall. Mm-hmm. So she'll keep looking at it. And then when she gets bored, she can turn away. And when she turns away for 2 seconds, the audio shuts off. And that'll happen for a series of 16 trials. So she'll be called again to another wall. She'll look, she'll hear the audio, she'll turn away, she'll look back, she'll turn away, and then the audio will turn off.
So in that situation, you're giving the dog control over whether the sound is going or not, and whether the sound shuts off or not. So you're looking for what the dog prefers to hear? Like the longer they pay attention to a certain kind of sound or the certain way their name is said, and that's kind of the baseline. You're like, okay, this dog, dogs prefer this, their name said this way over and over, and through multiple dogs paying attention to the same kind of sound and controlling it. Is that what's going on?
So, we are looking for the dog's preference. We control for the sort of manner in which the dog's name is said by making sure that both her name and the foil name are said in the exact same way. So, if Luna's name file involves a Luna, the other dog will have a Roscoe. So they're matched for the kinds of tones and intonations you use, because we know dogs care about that and they listen to that. So we're trying to keep that steady as a factor. So then we'll play both of those in quiet, and then we'll also play them embedded in this background noise for the dog. And we'll see exactly what they like listening to, what they prefer to listen to. And from the infant research, we expect them to prefer to listen to their own name. And then the question is whether in noise, they'll still prefer to listen to their own name. And if they have difficulty doing that, we know that they're having difficulty paying attention to the stimuli, because we know that their underlying hardware, their underlying auditory system is making it such that it's not a problem perceiving and assigning sounds to their relevant streams of auditory input. The issue is really, I'm having trouble paying attention because this other thing is also happening.
And so what did we find out?
So we find out that dogs are actually quite good at preferring their own name to another dog's name when the noise is either louder, or when their name is either louder than the background noise, or when it's at the same level. And that's actually better than we find in 13-month-old infants. So dogs are doing better than the infants are doing, solely based on their sort of underlying auditory hardware. So we can see, based on these results, what happens when the auditory system starts to mature. You start to become better at this perceptual ability to understand your name with these multiple talkers in the background.